Good afternoon, everyone. This is Donna Enrico with the Department of Community and Economic Development. I have our whole team and staff around the table here, as well as Kathy Cossinger. And today we're here to present some issues that we have found with the submission of the application and to answer any questions anyone might have with their submission, since the applications are due in September and in December for the OBOs. We do not intend for this webinar to be too long. We hope that everybody does understand that the application kit should be pretty familiar to you, as there have been very few changes over the last several years. And all the documents, thank you. All the documents that we are going to use in the presentation today, as well as the questions and answers, will be posted on DCED's website after the webinar. And what I would ask for everyone who is listening in to just please mute your phone, because if you don't, everyone can hear what's going on in your offices. So thank you for that. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to John Cherry, who's going to address how to ask questions for the end of the webinar.
Yeah, everyone, we're just going to be holding on to questions until the end of the webinar. You can use the Q&A function that's located right below your name. You can type your questions there. Or if you want to be brave and ask a verbal question, just raise your hand, which is also located beneath your name, and I'll just unmute your line from there. So.
Okay, thank you, John. We'll get started here, and hopefully everybody received the message that the 2016 CDBG application kit is available. It is on DCED's website as you apply under the electronic single application. The application kit is there, and you will see there is one addenda to the 2016 CDBG application. It is the force account labor form, which we will get into more detail about that form a little bit later. So Pennsylvania's allocation for 2016 is $37,464,741. As you can see, it's outlined, and this was also in the initial allocation memo, how this year's allocation has been allocated. As I said, the entitlement application deadlines, we originally set a date, but due to the late release of the application kit, we've extended it to be somewhat of a several-week window that you may submit your applications. But as always, if you are ready for submission on September 23rd or before, you are always welcome to go ahead and submit your applications. So the window between September 23rd and October 14th is for cities, county-only applications. That means those counties without any on behalf of entitlements. And the boroughs, towns, and townships with populations of 10,000 or greater are those that will be able to submit during that time frame. The second submission window is November 18th through December 16th. And this is for those counties that are applying on behalf of the smaller municipalities. What I would ask is that if you are submitting your applications within those time frames, you do not need to officially notify your grant managers, but out of courtesy, they would like to know if you're going to be late, and if you are going to go past those absolute last days of the deadlines, you do need to formally identify that your application will not be submitted either by the October 14th deadline or the December 16th deadline. The competitive program, again, we're offering it up, and there's a maximum grant amount of $750,000 available. Our priorities are still infrastructure projects that demonstrate a serious need. In the past, those have been water and sewer projects where we either do not have potable water, we have a lack of water, the systems are in really bad shape, or for sewer projects, those where you possibly have on-lot systems which are failing, or wildcat systems, but we do take applications for other types of projects. For those other types of projects, such as the blight removal, you really do need to have a 3 to 5 year strategy to complete some type of revitalization in the area where the blight removal is targeted. Just an announcement that we did just make an announcement of 6 competitive awards out of this last round of funding. And I would encourage those of you who are interested in submitting competitive applications that we certainly encourage you to talk with your grants manager about those applications, but in particular, if you are doing a blight remediation or some type of project other than our traditional priority sewer and water project, please review those with your grants managers just to make sure that what you're thinking of doing or plan on proposing is strong enough to meet our scoring criteria to be considered for funding. We really don't want anyone wasting time submitting an application that isn't going to score high enough to be considered. The deadlines for submission of the applications for 2015 funding, as I said, we already just went through a round 1, so any applications received between July 1st of 2016 and December 30th of 2016 will be our round 2. So as soon as they're submitted, we will allow several weeks for reviews here in the office and then go through a competitive review. And just as a note, we've put it on the bottom of slide 4 that all the information that we've just gone over was contained in the CDNH alert memo dated April 11, 2016. So as I said in the release of the CDNH alert notifying everyone of the webinar, this isn't really intended to go through how to submit the application. The last 2 years we've done a webinar that really covered a lot of that information on how to complete forms, etc. But I've asked staff to kind of prepare a listing of what has slowed down the review of the applications, what are the items that are impacting a speedy review or a complete review that we can offer up award letters. And the overarching sort of theme is that we've got missing information, incomplete information, or perhaps inaccurate information, information that is not consistent throughout the application. So pretty much the next several slides that we cover are really going to go over those areas where we're asking you to really take a look at and be careful in your submissions so that it can help staff on our end cut back on the emails, cut back on the requests for additional information, and really having you not have to go back in and resubmit documentation because it wasn't accurate. So one thing that we would ask you to do is to just read the instructions on each page or each section so you understand what we're asking for. If you don't understand, again, pick up the phone, send a quick email to your grants manager. If they're not in the office, I don't mind answering those questions, but one of the things is just to understand what we're asking for and make sure that each of those sections that we're asking to be completed be filled out and completed. If we're asking for it, it is necessary. It's not optional. We have tried to pare down the submission to be just the information that is necessary for our review, for HUD's possible review in the future, for when the auditors come in, that the documentation is in our files. One of the first items that we've covered where you're required to submit certain notices, whether they're published or posted, you will identify that they are in there, but we ask for a copy to be submitted. So those items that were notices that we're asking to be submitted, please make sure that a copy is in the application kit. If you have not received your proof of publication as of your submission, then we would ask that you just slip a piece of paper in that says your proof of publication has not been received as of the submission, and you will forward it. That will allow us to not have to ask that question. Mapping. As part of the community development plans that everybody's required to submit, which identifies your needs in the way of what is your infrastructure needs, your housing needs, your public service needs, your economic development needs. Part of it is also in identifying who your low-mod population is, where they're located, your minority population concentration, as well as where you are putting your activity, what community. And if you look at page 36 on the application kit, section B1G, it identifies that you are required to include census tract maps that identify the low and moderate income block groups. You are also required to identify in that map your minority concentrations, and you should also include a map identifying your project locations and service area boundaries. Some of this information that we're asking for may also be obtained from surveys that you have completed, but it is one of the requirements, and again, it goes back to the intent of the program, and the intent of the program is that we're supposed to be serving primarily low and moderate income populations. So that is one of the biggest things that we have to go back and ask for are better maps having this information on it because these applications have come in without that information. Another item that we have identified is that the community development plan itself will contain information on the needs, and then the activity descriptions that are being proposed or the activities that are being proposed are not even identified in your community development plan. So if it is a need, it has to be identified in the plan. So that's another thing to be careful with. And what we want to just point out for the counties applying for all the non-entitled areas, your census tract maps that should be attached to your CPD plan need to indicate all those municipalities that have low and moderate income populations, because that's one of the parts of our FHEO compliance is to look at where our activities are going, and if we have identified low and moderate income areas, why we're not placing activities in there. That kind of information should really be explained in your CPD plan. And at this point, because we're talking about maps, I'm going to hand it over to Melissa Williams, who's going to talk a little bit about we have some examples of really good comprehensive maps to be used for activities, and she'll point out some of the things that make it easier for us when we're reviewing your activities.
Okay, so the map that's showing on the slide right now, it's very comprehensive. It's color-coded, and it identifies everything that you are putting in your activity description narrative. It identifies the project location, and then it also identifies like state routes, has street names, even the little dots, which I know you're not going to be able to see, actually have the house number on them. And then down in the coding, the key, it identifies to us all the homes that have been surveyed, which kind of shows your service area, and they color-coded it, and I think it would be a good practice to kind of adopt for all of us so that we can all be, you know, looking at the same thing. So you have your red dots are showing your low to mod income households. Your green dots are showing the ones that are above. You have blue indicating businesses. The yellow are vacancies, and the orange are no responses. So when we receive a map like this, and then you also submit the income survey documentation as the backup documentation, we can actually go through each one of those income surveys and identify which houses are which on this map, and it kind of makes it easier for us to understand that, you know, this income survey was done properly. The only thing that this map doesn't show, which you probably will, hopefully you'll have in your CPD notice, is the map that shows the census tracts, the minority population, those type of things. So you can have this map as well as another copy of the map that was in your CPD notice, and you would just kind of indicate where this particular activity is on that map. Now, if you go to the next slide, here's an example of mapping that kind of makes it hard for us here at DCED to try to figure out what you're telling us, and based off of your activity description narrative, and for us to try to figure out what it is you're doing. There's no project area identified. There's no service area identified. Again, the low mob population and the census tract aren't on here. And for example, this particular project, it included 3rd Street Extension, 4th Street, and 4th Street Extension. And they only wanted to survey 4 homes. Well, 3rd Street is very long. There's more than 4 homes on it. So without the project area being identified, without the houses being identified that were actually being surveyed, there was a lot of questions and nothing correlated with the description that was submitted to us. So this kind of slows down our reviews, and it causes a lot of back and forth questioning. So the more information you can give us, the clearer that your backup documentation is, especially when you're trying to show us your service areas, the faster we can, get these reviews done. Dawn, is there anything extra that you want to add?
No, thank you, Melissa. I would just say that, again, it's very important. You all know your communities. You know what's out there. The only things that we have to make our determination of eligibility and fundability is based off of these maps. I must say that, Google and Bing Maps nowadays, where they'll allow us to put that person on the street, it doesn't give us everything, but staff here really use that. And I've always said, prior to submitting your activity, you should be on the ground in every municipality that's requested an activity so that you as a grant administrator understand that project, understand what we're doing, why we're doing, and who is actually benefiting from it. The only thing we have at our disposal to review the applications is to look at these maps. And what we're questioning is when you've provided information that doesn't make sense or we're not comfortable because of what we see. So again, if you give us these complete maps, your narrative matches what we're seeing on the map, it really should lessen the questions that we have about your project and the service areas. So we would just encourage you to look at that comprehensive map. And actually, I just noticed on this particular one, it should say it's an example of a not-so-comprehensive map that's up on the project area now. We will change that prior to posting. But again, this particular map that's on your screen does not identify the project area, has not identified the service area, and it really makes it difficult for staff. I want to say, too, I'm going to apologize and ask for John to go back to slide, I think, slide 5 and 6. Unfortunately, I turned my page before I went over these 2 slides, so I'm going to do that now. This is just a reminder for invoicing and for setting up our contracts, is that if you have contract conditions, we did begin this with 2015. We discussed this last year during the application webinar. We discussed it at the conference, that we cannot set up IDIS unless all contract conditions are removed. The reason that is being done is that previously, if we had contracts that had activities conditions, it is my understanding that when we issue an IDIS setup letter, we just set up the entire grant amount, and there's no control over the activities that have contract conditions. and many grantees, prior to clearing those conditions, were expending dollars on activities that were conditioned. So at this point, this is the only way we can control not having money drawn down on activities that are conditioned, and unfortunately, it does impact the activities that are ready to go. And one of the reasons, I think it was in March or April, we had sent out a notice saying, you know, you should begin the planning process to start identifying, you know, when you would have your hearings, what types of needs were out there, so that when you submit your 2016, we're hoping that these activities are ready to go. And for most of those activities, if surveys are needed, those surveys have been conducted to support what activities you're submitting with your 2016 submission. Again, the grant managers had attempted to clear as many conditions as possible prior to recommending approval, but there's still a significant number of activities that are being conditioned because the beneficiary information is missing or incomplete, activities are not eligible, service areas weren't delineated or supported, or just a lack of supporting documentation. And again, I think I have it on the next slide. You really have to understand that the grant managers have a heavy load of reviewing, you know, a number of applications, each of them. But in addition, when you combine those applications being submitted, we're averaging between 400 and 500 activities each year, and that does not include your administrative activity in your application. So they really have to review a large number of activities every year, and the same scrutiny is placed on each of those activities, regardless of whether that activity is a $2,000 activity or that activity is a $100,000 activity. It's basically the same type of review. So again, we're just trying to go over some of these issues that have really delayed getting some of the contracts out, and hopefully if this information, if we can make sure there's consistency and completeness, it should help us. Our goal still is to continue reducing the number of activities, especially small activities. I just ran the numbers today before the webinar, and we have somewhere between 30 and 50 activities that are coming in at less than $10,000. And when I look back, I'd have to go back into the system to really see what we're doing. But, you know, when we're putting $2,000 into a park, or we're putting $4,000 into a sidewalk improvement, or we're putting $3,500 into a public facility, it takes the same amount of time to review those applications to do the compliance as it does a $100,000 project. So again, we recognize that there are grantees out there who have limited the number of activities. We applaud you, and some of that has been based off of your recognizing your staffing limitations, the limited amount of funding that we have, and the timeliness of implementing these projects. So we would just ask for that consideration moving forward as well. So with that, we're going to move on to slide 10. So again, some examples, fair housing requirements. Back in April, notice was sent advising grantees that we were going to have some new templates for our fair housing and equal opportunity requirements. And then in June, those templates were issued. So just a reminder, please make sure that whatever you have, that it does comply with the latest requirements. Again, some of the things that were missing in the past were your published fair housing officer notice, the past resolution. Those are annual requirements. You cannot use what you did in having approved resolution in perhaps calendar year 2013 put into your 2016 application. We need a new resolution. And just a reminder that grantees need to do an annual review and an adoption of plans and updates when applicable. Most of this information ties back to the application description and certifications. This is page 6 in the application kit, boxes 20 through 27. If you put not applicable or you leave those sections blank, it raises a question because these are required plans and updates that are necessary on some of them annually, so we should have everything completed. Okay, the next one is not a new form. We're going to talk about a certification of completion in the 4-factor analysis. While it is not a new form, it has been updated, and again, this is the result of the department being monitored by Husker Housing and Equal Opportunity Division, and they requested some updates and changes to our forms. So some of the things that we want to talk about under the 4-factor analysis is, first off, for counties. Counties need to look at the limited English proficiency data for your non-entitled jurisdictions within the county. What we saw last year was a lot of the counties looked at the data for the county as a whole. And obviously, most of the counties as a whole do not meet a limited English proficiency population. That wasn't the intent. The intent was to look at those non-entitled jurisdictions within the county to see if there are any areas that have a limited English proficiency population that met the minimum either, I think it was 5% or 1,000 in population. And we'll go over an example of when it kicks in for one of our counties, and we've used it in the past. But in the 4-factor, we have, first off, looking at identifying that data to determine those LEP populations. Factor 2 will identify the types of activities you're proposing and how frequent that limited English proficiency population may come into contact with the proposed activity. So you are going to need to think through where your activities are located and the type of activities you're doing. The other thing is the nature and importance of these activities or services. Is it a direct benefit activity? Obviously, if you're doing housing rehabilitation, it is county-wide, and you have identified limited English proficiency populations throughout the county. This is going to be one of those keys where you're not going to be able to say that it's not applicable here. You're going to have to check off that it is, you have to comply. For Factor 4, you identify resources available to provide outreach in the limited English proficiency language. And we just want to make everybody know that your admin costs are eligible, an eligible CDBG expense for translation, for production of these materials and pamphlets in a different language. So you can't say that it's not feasible to do this when the money is there to make this information available. Part of the next slide, John, please. There is a certification that you have completed the 4-factor analysis. I would just suggest, reading through it before you attempt to complete it. But we will be looking to make sure that they are completed properly and that the information that you've put in it is consistent with the LEP data that we've provided to everyone. And that certificate of completion and findings is required. So every application that comes in at least has to have the certification of completion of the analysis done. And then some of you will be required, in addition to doing the certification for the 4-factor analysis, some of you will be required to do a language access plan and have that submitted as well. As I said before, the limited English proficiency population greater than 5% or 1,000 is identified. A plan is going to be required. And if any of your 4 factors after you've done the analysis does meet a threshold again, a limit or a language access plan will be required. We will be looking at those, and it's my understanding, and Kathy's here to confirm, that from the compliance side, we will be sampling the 4-factor analysis and the limited English proficiency data that we have to ensure that they have been done properly over the next 12 months. Is that correct?
That's correct. And one thing we do want to stress is the importance here is that we're, as a community development program, making efforts to ensure that equal access is available to all persons regardless of their native language. And Donna will go over in a minute an example of how to look at what communities do speak English less than very well. However, we want to ensure that it's not just those who have a population of greater than 5% or 1,000 within a language other than English. You have to look as well at the nature of your project. Is it a potential that you'll interact with a person or persons who speak English less than well or have a native language other than English? Public services, for example, is a great example of an activity that you do not know who is going to come into your door for food bank services in your community. You need to ensure that your programs are accessible to people of any language. So therefore, this process is required. It is a requirement of DCED, also a requirement of HUD. DCED in the next several months will be engaging on a statewide language access plan as well. So you're not the only ones who are doing this. We're doing it as well. And this is part of the new, some of the growing requirements to affirmatively further fair housing and ensure equal access to resources in our community. So this isn't just a check-the-box activity. Although it is necessary, you go and read through every aspect of the 4-factor analysis. If you do not meet factor 1 of having 5% or 1,000, as Donna noted, that does not mean that you're done. You still need to go to factor 2, and if factor 2 does or does not meet, you go to factor 3 and so on. So the process essentially is, I hate to say, it's somewhat self-explanatory as you read through the 4-factor analysis, but once you are complete with the process, you certify that the community will create, if necessary, a language access plan. At this point, we're not requiring that that plan is included in the document, but noting that it does have to be completed and that you will do it.
Thank you, Kathy. The next slide does contain an example, and as I said, a lot of folks, Adams County is the first one that pops out. It's always the first one that's on all of the data just because it starts with an A. That's the only reason that I picked it out here. But they also have several smaller communities, boroughs and townships within the county that have limited English proficiency populations that speak English less than very well. And so with those thresholds that have been placed upon us, we've pulled this out to show that even if Adams County looked at the county level, this would not show up. But when you go down into the micro level of looking at each municipality, these 7 municipalities do have a non-English speaking population with a percentage of more than 5% in each of those respective municipalities. So they really would have to look at the types of, in addition to having to do a plan based on the population itself, they also have to take into consideration, as Kathy said, are they offering up public services that may impact anyone living in those municipalities? Do they have an activity identified as a direct benefit activity, such as housing rehab or lateral installations, perhaps sidewalks being done on a low mod benefit? Those are direct benefit activities that would have to be considered with this here, the identified populations here, and they will need to address that by other means so that the folks who may have the potential to participate have equal access to the same information but in their native language. Okay, moving on. We're going to move to the activity description forms because this is really for us, while I will consider all of the information in the application kit to be very important. The activity description forms are what allow us to determine that we are funding eligible activities and that they meet a national objective. Just a reminder that, some of the forms have changed. We would appreciate it if you would use the 2016 application kit. I'll just throw it in at this moment that there were some grantees who have made some suggestions to make our application kit a little more customer-friendly by having some of the form fields add up, and I'd like to thank John Cherry. He took on that particular task, and this year has helped to hopefully make the application kit just a little more customer-friendly in having those forms such as the timeliness form and the budget, to have them add up as fillable, but also they will pre-populate once you put your information in. So on the activity description form, as I said, there's two tests that we have to meet. This test is always met up front during application submission, eligibility, and national objectives. Who are we benefiting? But that test also occurs in the back end when we are monitoring and closing out the project, in that once the projects are done, to ensure that what was proposed was the same to meet eligibility, and that the proposed beneficiaries are who, in fact, had benefited from the project. In our citations and our regulations, I want to let folks know that there are two different sections in the regulations which really identify eligibility of the activities. That's 24 CFR 570-482. It's pretty generic there under the state regulations, but if you go into the Housing and Community Development Act, there's a lot more detail on the types of activities, and you'll note that the budget in the 2016 application actually references all the ACD Act citations for eligibility. There are a lot of folks confused as to, I think it's box 10 on the activity description, which asks for what national objective are you meeting? How is benefit to for these activities being determined? And that is a different citation. Your national objective is different than eligibility, and I can't tell you the number of folks who've had to go back and ask to correct their activity description forms and resubmit because they're using the eligibility citation. I would just encourage anyone who is not clear on this to contact your grants manager or myself. We would really like to not have to ask in 2016 for any resubmissions because we don't have the correct citations. And what we've done up here is if you go into the state regs, 24 CFR 570, it's a 483 series. It's a little bit longer than the 482 series, but it will talk or speak to the benefit or the national objective and how it's determined. And Section A on the activity description goes through the different ways we can determine low mod benefit. And honestly, when we're justifying our activities, you can't choose multiple national objectives to qualify an activity. It can only qualify on one national objective. So under low mod benefit, we could have low mod area. A lot of times those are our water, sewer projects, stormwater, neighborhood centers, something that benefits an area, a group of folks in a defined area. We can also benefit or choose a national objective of limited clientele. Limited clientele, we'll get into a little bit more detail, but again, limited clientele can be on presumed benefit. HUD has given us the presumptions that they'll allow when those services or facilities are exclusively used by those presumed clientele. You could do it based on income. Is it designed in such a way that we need to, we're only serving folks who are low income, where we will have income surveys on each person served, and in the end, at least 51% of them are low and moderate income? or we can do it on the nature or location of the activity for limited clientele. And we'll have some examples a little bit later. Your low-mod housing, when we're doing housing activities or some of the direct benefit activities such as laterals or sidewalks, they can qualify on housing. Job creation, pretty self-explanatory. It is when we do an activity that will create or retain low and moderate income jobs, then we qualify it on the low-mod job. Section B, if we're qualifying an activity for a national objective of removal of slum and blight, we've got two tests that we can meet, either slum and blight removal on an area basis or slum and blight removal on a spot basis. And Section C is urgent need, qualifies after a significant natural disaster. Basically, we almost never have an urgent need project. It's hard to qualify meeting HUD's requirements. If you think you have an urgent need project, I would ask that you contact your grants manager prior to submission. The next slide still continues to talk about errors on the activity description form and the national objective, the eligibility and the national objective. One of the things, too, that we ask is that you choose the correct matrix code. And again, from the grant manager standpoint and the upfront review, we have to make a determination of eligibility and fundability, the national objective. But much of the information that you have keyed in also goes into the Commonwealth Consolidated Plan or the annual CAPER to report to HUD, because HUD's requiring us to place in those plans what are our proposed uses, and then there's a back end where we talk about our actual accomplishments that are through the IDIS reporting system. And Kathy, I'm looking at her to just confirm that I've gotten that right. So when you're submitting, it is critical that you actually use the right matrix codes so that in the back end, when there are some checks and balances being done, if we said we were doing a recreation center under the HUD matrix code at the application onset, when we finally look at closeout, we should still be seeing a rec center and not a senior center or a community center or a generic public facility in the IDIS reporting. It really should match what you had stated up front. So just please be careful. And I have to say, the reference Appendix E in the application kit is from the IDIS website. It is HUD's definition of what fits in under each of those matrix codes. It's very clear, it's very concise, and if we ever have questions when folks are asking us, that's the first place we go to. We look there to see where does it fit best. So we're asking you folks, if you have questions about where it goes, please look at Appendix E because that's our reference point. Include your support documentation. If you have web links, your census maps, your aerial maps, any surveys, any newspaper articles, anything that ties in to support your activity and what that activity is that you're doing, put that information with there. Don't assume we know that project like you do. Oftentimes we will get into conversations and more than likely short conversations with a grant administrator or an engineer or somebody about the project, and we're done talking to them in 5 minutes because one small statement or piece of information that they assumed we knew was not included, but in our conversations it really clears up a lot of the questions that we have. So just try to be clear and concise and put your support documentation in there. Be consistent with your information. As I said, your numbers need to match. Any inconsistencies need explanations. Some of the examples that I can give you is that sometimes, somebody will say, oh, we're going to install 1,000 linear feet of water, and our service area is going to benefit 15 households along there. Well, we turn and we look at the budget that the engineer has provided, and all of a sudden we've got 30 lateral connections, but you're telling us there's only 15. obviously for us, that raises a red flag. If you explain to us that those other 15 connections might be non-residential, that clears it up for us. But if you don't state that, again, we've got to put everything down. We've got to compose an email, or we have to pick up the phone, and we've got to get documentation to support those inconsistencies. So we were just asked that, look at it from our standpoint. We don't know as much as you do. Even if you think that, you know, oh, this is too much, maybe it's not too much. Maybe that's the piece we need to really understand and put that project together. The other thing is that sometimes we'll see on the budget that you might have that, you know, we're putting $90,000 into a project, and we turn back to the engineer's estimate, and it's a $400,000 project. Where's that gap? How's that gap being filled? Are we only doing a portion of the project? Is there a larger project out there? These are the types of inconsistencies that cause us to have a lot of additional information and a lot of time spent back and forth trying to figure out what's going on. Oh, yes, please do.
I just want to reiterate what Donna is saying here. Your application should tell your complete story of the project or activity that you're undertaking with your CDBG funds. Whether it's a competitive application or whether it's an entitlement application, we need to be able to see up front that your project is eligible and meets a national objective. But we also want to see and need to see that if there's a full project, what are your sources and what are your uses? If you're requesting, if your total project cost is $400,000 and your CDBG funds are only going to be used for $100,000 of that project, where are those other sources coming from? Are you able to complete that project within an appropriate timeline? We are expected by HUD to retain a record and ensure that all of the activities that we certify and allow you to draw on through your IDIS program and IDIS funds meet a national objective, are eligible, and our file has to tell a story. We have to see that we've been able to demonstrate compliance. So to reiterate Donna's point, we want to ensure that all of the information that you're pulling together is able to tell that story effectively. Yes, we certainly will have to ask questions, and that's where your grant managers are available on the front end to ask specific questions about your activities, talk about ensuring that the description and detail is accurate. Use them as a resource. They're here for you through the whole process, not just after the application is submitted as well. So I just wanted to reiterate that, the importance of telling your story in this application. We ask you to tell your story a couple of times. Once in the beginning when you apply, and again at the end when we're reviewing and when we're telling your story at the CAPER in your annual reports. We want to ensure that you've done what you've asked for and you've funded eligible activities, and then later that you've done what you said you were going to do and you did it correctly. So,
okay. Thank you, Kathy. So we're going to get into two new forms that are in the application kit. They should not be too tedious for anyone, but what we've tried to do is we've added a force account labor certification and a limited clientele worksheet reporting form. For the force account, it isn't that it comes up often, but it comes up often enough that when we are monitoring, we're not finding the right information in the project files, or we get into projects that folks have said we're going to do force account, and 3 years later the project is not done because there was not enough forethought done to ensure that the workforce was available or the type of equipment was available in the time frame necessary to complete the application or to complete the activity. So what we did was we tried to put together, and John, you have to tell me, can they see the form now? Okay, so you should be able to see the force account labor worksheet. And basically all of this is asking the community to do is to look at the project that they want to use their own workforce to complete, look at the types of staffing that they have or manpower that they have available to complete the project, look at what type of materials they are going to need to complete the project, look at the type of equipment and machinery that might be necessary to complete the project, and to provide estimates. This sort of takes the place of the engineer's estimate or the architect's estimate of, you know, a project. Somebody has to think through what this is going to take and the time frame for completion. This is an estimate on this certification. It also, when you get to page 2, it talks about if you need to hire anyone to help complete the job, that you certify that they're going to be bona fide employees of the municipality, that they cannot be contractors. That's a past practice that had occurred where folks went out and sort of hired subcontractors, and it was seen as getting around the Davis-Bacon Act requirements. And so we don't want that to happen with anyone. We want to keep everybody in compliance. So up front, this is an estimate. This is the only thing that needs to be submitted with your application. If there's an activity that is being proposed for force account, staff will review it to make sure that it appears that this activity can be completed in 3 years, that it's been thought out. You will receive acknowledgement that you can proceed with it. And from this point going forward, if any municipality proposes force account with any modification or revision, this form will be required as well. Then what we're going to supply everyone with, John, if you could bring it up, oh, you can't bring it up. Okay, so what goes with this force account certification is going to be an Excel spreadsheet, and it's going to contain information on your materials purchased, when were they purchased, how much was purchased, and the cost. It's going to also provide information on employees who are working on that job, the days they worked on that job, and payrolls that need to support the labor costs. And then there's going to be a third tab at the bottom that will make available to everyone on your equipment usage. If you're going to rent or lease, the type of documentation that needs to be supported with that. It's not completed as of today, but we will be completing it. We will be putting it out there on the department's website in the library. But the force account certification is available. As I said, I believe it is an addenda on the electronic single application. So it is out there, and it will also be available in the library as soon as we upload everything. So with force account, we'll now go to the limited clientele worksheet reporting form. As I said before, some of the things we have to make projections on, and part of it is when we're doing limited clientele activities, we aren't getting numbers for the physically disabled. We're not getting numbers of folks that were benefiting. So basically, this form is a two-part form. One, to make sure we've got the right limited clientele identification of whether it's presumed benefit, if we're doing it by income categories, or we're doing nature or location. So, John, could you just scroll back up just a little bit right there? On the presumed benefit, those 8 identified populations, HUD has already deemed that they are presumed to be low and moderate income as long as those activities that we're doing exclusively benefit those populations, and that there is data locally to support that those are the only populations we're doing. I want to talk a little bit about the elderly population, age 62 and older. This has been recent within the past year where HUD has definitely said that seniors, when we do a lot of senior center activities, seniors must be 62 and above because HUD defines elderly as at 62 and older. Their definition is taken from 24 CFR Part 5. And so a lot of our senior centers work closely with the AAA. not the American Automobile Association, but rather the Area Agency on Aging. And so Area Agency on Aging, their limits are 60 and older. So unfortunately, if we're working with senior centers that open up their services to folks who are under 62 or are disabled, you cannot use the presumption, but you're still able to qualify the activity if you do an income survey on your, I'm going to call them members, I know they're not true members, but users of the senior services, and at least 51% of them are over low mod. Unfortunately, it is a rule. We've discussed it with HUD. That is their direction for us on qualifying these activities. So we're not saying you can't do it under limited clientele. It's just you cannot use the presumption if you're serving folks who are under the age of 62. I think the rest of them are pretty self-explanatory on the presumption. So we get down to the income eligibility. Those are where you're requiring documentation on the family size and income in order to provide benefit to folks. Some of that may be is that you may be helping a local clinic that provides services to single mothers with children. That would be one where you would be taking the income limit of every family that comes in to determine that at least 51% of them would be low mod. There is, the last one is the nature and location. That would be, our example is if we were funding a daycare center or a playground that served only the residents of a public complex. That is where you could do the nature of that particular activity or location. Gives us what we need. It doesn't mean that that's it. We still have to have some certification from the housing complex that they have income qualifications that meet our income qualifications, but what it doesn't require us to do is go and survey everyone. So hopefully that is clear. This has to be filled out. Part 2 on the documentation, you will fill out whether you're doing the presumption and provide your source documentation, or you will do your income certification and tell us that that's how it qualifies, or you will do the nature and location and give us the background documentation to support those. Again, we're not getting all of this information up front to do our projections and then match them up with our end result. So if there are any questions about this new worksheet, just let us know. We'll be willing to put out additional information if necessary, but I do believe if you read through it, it's pretty self-explanatory and we can have that completed and submitted as well. Okay, I think our next slide 18, the public and community facilities. I just do want to say that, you know, a lot of you folks are providing the information necessary for us to determine that who owns the facilities, the membership requirements, that they're open to the general public. So we're very appreciative of that. But I have to say, one of the things that we do find out is that perhaps you haven't researched their websites when you've provided some information, because what we have in the application as to who's benefiting and what they're stating out on their website can sometimes not be, or I should say, is in conflict. So please make sure that you're checking what those websites say about the public facility that you're wanting to fund and that it matches up with what you're putting in your application. I've already gone over the senior citizen qualification as a presumed benefit. Pretty self-explanatory. So the project budget. Now this is on our activity. When we talk about a project budget, it does need to be completed where we talk about the finances for the activity, but we also ask that you list sort of what are we paying for with those funds. This is more the detailed budget, and some folks are forgetting to complete that information on the back side of the project budget form. This is one of those where you should include all sources of funds so the project makes sense to us, especially if there's an engineer's estimate that is much greater than what you've allocated to the project. And again, we're asking to make sure that these activities can be completed in a 3-year time frame. While I've not put it on the slide, one of the things that everybody's going to have to be very mindful of this year is the grant-based account, where, you know, this money is going to have to be used, and extensions and extending contracts are probably not going to be as easy as they were before. And again, that's why we want some thoughtful planning to take place up front to avoid getting into these rushes to try to save money, to try to save projects. The budget summary form, that is the budget that gets attached to your contract. Please make sure that that's consistent with your activity description forms. Please make sure that everything adds up. If you've got several activities that are street improvement activities, make sure that whatever you've allocated up front on the individual activity description form ends up with that cumulative budget in the backside. Make sure that the HUD matrix codes that you're using for your activities description forms match up with the HUD matrix codes that you're using on the budget form. Again, we say this not to just be picky, but all of that is produced out of the system to be attached to your blueback contract. When we have to make adjustments because there are inaccuracies, it causes additional work here. It slows down our processes, and you know, sometimes we come back to you and ask you to fix it, and we'd rather not have to like touch these things 2 and 3 times. I would also ask that you not use cents on your budget. We can't contract in cents. It has to be whole dollars. And another thing that, you know, is kind of, and folks are, it gets less and less each year, but we haven't gotten to the point where we've totally eliminated the fact that on your admin at 18%, it is a maximum. So please don't round up. Make sure your calculators go out to the nth degree and you're rounding down, not up. It again, are things that, you know, if we miss it, our legal office does catch it. Somebody's catching it, and then, again, it slows down our process. The next couple of slides I really don't want to go over because we've already gone over this last year, counties administering OBOs. Your form submissions, what you're required to do. The only thing that we've added as a note to consider is in some of the OBOs in 15, in their management plan, they did not account for grant management of the OBO. They've kind of missed it. Just update your plan, make sure you're including who's taking care of what in those on behalf of grantees. Again, there can be different types of relationships where you are asking some of those former OBOs to still be involved in the project. That's fine. Just make sure it's noted in there. And on your timeliness form, again, county OBOs, now that you've administered their 15 grants and we're going on with the 16th, you will have to include all of the 15 allocation in those figures. Any of the grants that you're administering need to be on that form now. And that's just a little reminder. And then as far as, you know, those are the biggest things are just, as I said, either that we're missing information, we have inconsistencies in the information, or we don't have the correct supporting documentation. And that is really impacting the reviews. All of the forms that we've referenced, as well as the PowerPoint presentation, will be available on DCED's library. And what I want to, you know, kind of like, you know, say it again and again and again, and I know that MJ has sent out several CD&H alerts, our web domain has changed. It is dced.pa.gov. What I'm going to ask everybody to do is that if you had bookmarks with the old newpa.com, delete them. Those links from that old domain to our new domain are not working, and we've gotten lots of inquiries about where's the library. I can assure you, if you go to the link in the PowerPoint that's up on the screen right now, you will get to the library. And John is going to show you, he's going to bring up what the web page looks like, because a lot of folks, when they first see our page, they actually see, can you scroll up, John? Oh, you're at the library. Can you just do newpa.gov? Or DCED, I'm sorry, DCED.pa.gov. So a lot of times, everyone sees that page right there, and they think that that is the front page, and don't realize that on the right-hand side, you can scroll down on our front page. John is scrolling, and when you get down to the bottom of the page, you just keep going, there's the library. So if the link, if you can't find the link to it, the library is on the first page. You click on it, and it will come up to the link that we've provided you, which is the DCED.pa.gov/library. And in the library, once it comes up, you're going to see the Federal Resource Library. And I have to say that MJ has done a wonderful job trying to get all of our information back on there after the web kind of crashed on us, our site crashed. She's done a tremendous job. I won't say for sure that we've gotten everything back up, but in the CDBG, we're working to get all of our information. We have under the American Community Survey the latest data that we're using. Under the application folder, we have the last three years. We'll be putting up 16s in there. We'll be trying to update the activity descriptions that are available. But as you can see, there's a lot of information for everybody to use. Remove your old bookmarks, put the new one in, which is DCED.pa.gov, so you can get to the information because it is there. The other resource, and you can ask all the staff here, we do have a hard copy, but most of us also have it bookmarked, is the HUD Exchange, where we've provided to everyone the guide to national objectives and eligible activities for the state CDBG program. We have a link to that in the PowerPoint. As I said, we all bookmark it here. It has a host of resources. When we're looking for stuff, we go out to the resource library if we can't find it. And I would encourage everybody to use those resources. And as well, you have all of your grant managers that are here willing to provide you with any assistance. But what we ask is that, please do your research first before you come in asking questions, because we're going to ask, did you look on the web, the HUD Exchange? Did you go into DCED's library? And if you can't find the answers there, then I say, yes, please come to us. We are here to help. So with that, the last page on the PowerPoint is the latest. Everyone should have received the latest in the staff assignments at this point. And I think at this time, I did see that there are a number of questions that came in. So we're going to try to answer some of them if they already haven't been answered. And as I said, we will be doing a Q&A, which will again be put on our library. If we can get it done by tomorrow, they may be up by tomorrow, and if not, everything will definitely be up by next week. The first question deals with setting up IDIS on a grant all at once, and why. Let me see what it says. The first one deals with setting up activities in IDIS when all of the environmental clearances are not complete. And I'm going to say I have to talk with the client side of the office before I answer that particular question, but we will have an answer for you. The next question, it says the Fair Housing Resolution fillable form was added to of the library but hasn't yet. Is that coming soon? It should. I thought, and I'd have to look back at MJ's June 1st CD&H alert. I thought that all the templates were fillable, but certainly all of that information should be up on the website, and we'll provide a link to it. Okay, the next question is, where can the latest LEP data, they say LAP, but it is actually LEP data, be found? You have a website. DCED has provided that worksheet. It's an Excel spreadsheet that was produced for us by the Penn State Data Center. We, again, will provide you the link where it is in the library. It is available for everyone. The next question is, the language access plan required due to project nature in an area without required concentration of limited English proficiency. How do we complete a language access plan when we are required to publish notices, for example, in identified language? Is that still required for the plan? I'm struggling with how that question is posed. What are you doing for me, John, here? Whoever has asked that question about the language access plan, if you could call just so I can get better information on really what you're asking, because I'm not quite sure, I would appreciate it. Okay, page 12. Flood disaster protection, flood insurance maintained as a condition of funding. For how long, what documentation is necessary? I would ask what document you're talking about for page 12. You're talking about the environmental review requirements. I believe that if we look in the Housing Rehab Guidebook, what it states is that when flood insurance is required, it is required for the life of the improvement that you have made. So, for instance, if you are going in and you're providing a new roof or a new furnace with funding and it is in a floodplain, you're required to maintain that flood insurance for the life of those improvements. Okay, the next question is, there's a confidentiality concern on survey maps showing address or house location of low and moderate income respondents. Understood, and for the one that we have, yes, they identified by house numbers or street numbers. That's not a requirement, but it is nice to have that information available as to which homes were low mod identified, even if it is by a circle, a red circle versus a blue circle, or whatever color you might choose. That's the more important part of it. You can maintain those in your files with the street addresses on them if you would like, but they are, if you're concerned about confidentiality, that information has to be in your files anyway on the survey form. Next question is, can force account be used on municipal projects, or can the county utilize the service as well? I would state that as long as your municipal code calls for it, we're permitting force accounts to be used regardless of the type of municipality. And I would also kind of add to that, that if you are a county and you have your agreements with your OBOs or these other non-entitled municipalities, perhaps that's something you want to have in your agreement as to whether or not force account will be used and whose force account will be used on those projects. But that is locally determined. Okay, the next question speaks to that over the last several years, they have had to change their HUD matrix code that relates to storm sewer activities. At one point in time, storm sewer was lumped with the O3J water, and we were told O3I flood drainage, and then O3K street improvements. So to clarify, and that's why we added in, looking at the definition in the HUD matrix code narrative. If it is a street storm sewer project, the HUD matrix codes ask that you identify it as an O3J water and sewer. O3I, if you read the HUD matrix narrative for flood and drainage, it really speaks to levees and larger flood projects. O3K, street improvements, it depends on what is driving the project. You might be doing a street improvement project which has some storm drainage attached to it, but the main purpose of that project is a street project. That's really what is driving the activity. Then street improvements would be the correct HUD matrix code, but it really goes back to what's driving the project. If your stormwater is just driving that project, then it's going to be, and John, I think you just removed that from the screen for me to see, it's going to be the O3J water and sewer. So, and if you have any questions, again, contact your grants manager. They'll walk through it, but I believe if you read Appendix E, it's very clear as to how that should go into the activity description. Okay, next question is regarding Section 504. The application states that this designation must be made in writing and at a public meeting. Does this mean a public notice in the newspaper? Are there any requirements as to what the notifications should state? Can you just provide me with the section of the application kit that speaks to the Section 504 requirement? And what I will say is if I get that, well, it talks about a copy of a notice. If you're talking about page 23 where it says a grantee with 15 or more employees must redesignate a 504 officer, that designation must be in writing and at a public meeting. So I would assume that this has to be a notice in the newspaper as well. And I will check to see if we can have those posted as opposed to publish. But I don't have a clear answer for you at this time, but we will get one. Okay, another question is, for forest account activities, can municipalities use COE equipment usage rates? Could you let me know what agency COE is? I know that we are recommending that we use the FEMA rates. So if whoever wrote that in could qualify, I will also get an answer and compare the rates from FEMA versus this other agency. So John, do we have any other questions? question is, assuming our application is error-free with respect to the project completion timetable in each activity description, what month in 2017 should we indicate we will receive our contract so that we can complete the timetable? I would, well, I'm not going to put a date in there. I would just suggest that we would hope to have the applications reviewed within 3 to 6 months. And it just depends on, you know, the level of issues with all the applications that come in, because grant managers, when they pick up an application, they don't know which ones are going to have issues and which ones don't, and they work through those. So I would just anticipate 3 to 4 months for you to start your project or receive your contract. Okay, the next question is it a mandated requirement that we have to do a public service announcement for the fair housing activities this year? If so, how would we pay for this? First off, fair housing activities are eligible expenses through the CDBG program, so it could come out of your admin dollars. And I'd have to go back and look at the FHEO guidance that was released from this office to tell you whether or not it is a mandated public announcement. So look for a follow-up on that Q&A for a definitive answer on whether or not it has to be a public announcement. Okay. So the next question is that will we be providing a fillable activity description form for 2016 so that it can be copied and saved to produce a number of activity descriptions? Absolutely. As I said, we just haven't had a chance to get everything up on the website, but by early next week, everything, including a separate activity description form as well as the budget form, will be up and available for multiple activities. Okay, and it says, can you by any chance walk us through where to find the 2016 application kit on the website? I saw the link you put up, but I'm still struggling to find it. I have to tell you that it is, when you go in to complete the electronic single application, and I don't see that part of it because I'm not a user of the system externally. It should be available when you're completing your ESA. However, if you also go on to the DCED.pa.gov/programs/community development block grant CDBG, you will find it. That's our community development page. The new guidelines are also on there. The guidelines do not have that addenda for the force account labor, but it will have the application kit available there as well. But as I said, the two places that should have the application kit is on the DCED website under programs, under community development block grant, and you'll see guidelines. But when you complete the ESA and you're applying for the CDBG funds, my understanding is you should also see it there, and on the ESA will have the required force account labor form if anybody is intending to use force account. Are there any more questions, John? Okay, I think at this time we're not seeing any additional questions, but we have taken all of the questions. We know that we still need to provide a few answers for folks, so look for those as soon as we have them updated and posted on the website. We will certainly let all of our grantees know. And as I said, if you have any questions filling it out, please contact your grants manager or myself, and good luck with the submissions. Thank you, everyone.